Welcome back, America, as we go through one of the most important shows I've ever done in 21 years. And we will have the first hour available to you, not only on marklevinshow.com, but also on Rumble and on YouTube, as we will this hour. I do want to say one thing directly to Antony Blinken. Sue me. Sue me. You won't be able to sue me in Washington, D.C. You have to sue me in Florida. So you won't have a bunch of radical left-wing Obama, Biden judges to help you. But sue me. Sue me for libel. I've spent a lot of my life in the law, most of it. Litigation, the Constitution. And what that would allow me to do, America, is to pursue discovery. Every document, every text, every phone call, a myriad of depositions. Government information, cables, that apparently Congress is unable to obtain, but I would be able to obtain. I want to see it all. And I have the ability to finance it all. And I would spend every damn penny I have to expose this rat's nest that is destroying our country and our allies. Every damn penny. I would hire a phalanx of lawyers who are every bit as aggressive and determined and brutal in the courtroom as I am. And I will get every shred of piece of information, and I will counterclaim. I tell you what, I salivate over this. Do it. Do it. And I'm not done. I've discussed with you to some extent, and you've heard from others about Blinken, the traitor. And there's so much more. But I can't do a Jerry Lewis telethon here. There's not enough time for that. But there's been a lot of writing about this Iranian high-level spy ring that was in Washington, D.C. What are you talking about, Mark? Isn't it amazing? Jake Tapper never covered it. Andrea Mitchell never covered it. The Morning Schmo and the Schmoites, they don't cover it. They don't care. I care. New York Times, Maggie Haberman, it's all Trump all the time. Lee Smith is an intrepid investigative reporter. He writes for The Tablet, among other places. Title of his piece from a little over a year ago, High-Level Iranian Spy Ring Busted in Washington, D.C. What? Never heard of this? What? It wasn't on cable TV? What? Wasn't on talk radio? What? The trail that leads from Tehran to D.C. passes directly through the offices of Robert Malley and the International Crisis Group. Who's Robert Malley? We've talked about this. Boyhood buddy of Antony Blinken. Malley's father was a terror sympathizer and a Marxist. And Blinken thought this should be our special envoy negotiating with Iran over our nuclear weapons. Folks, this is so consequential. It is so consequential. It's too late when we have historians and writers right after the fact. Iran is going to get a nuclear weapon. I have the report right in front of me. Right in front of me. The Institute for Science and International Security. A real group. Not a political group. And in this document that they just released, for the first time, they have a Geiger counter on Iran and nukes. For the first time, it says, we assess the situation as extreme danger. They bold it, they italicize it. And our Secretary of State is in the Middle East pounding away on Israel. funding the Iranians. Don't tell me he's not a traitor. Now let's talk about the Aldra Hiss side of this thing. Smith writes, the Biden administration has now suspended Iran envoy Robert Malley helped to fund, support, and direct an Iranian intelligence operation designed to influence the United States and allied governments, according to a trove of purloined Iranian government emails. Wow! Wow, how come that's not in the news? The emails, which were reported on by veteran Wall Street Journal correspondent Jay Solomon, writing in Semaphore, and by Iran International, the London-based emigre opposition outlet, which is the most widely read independent news source inside Iran, were published last week, a little over a year ago, after being extensively verified over a period of several months by two outlets, both of those outlets. They showed that Robert Malley had helped to infiltrate an Iranian agent of influence named Ariana Tabatabai into the most sensitive positions in the U.S. government. First at the State Department and now the Pentagon, where she's been serving as Chief of Staff for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Christopher Meyer. How does this happen? I'm just reading the story. Meyer told a congressional committee that the Defense Department is, quote, actively looking into whether all law and policy was properly followed in granting my Chief of Staff top secret special compartmented information. This is the Assistant Secretary saying it about his own Chief of Staff. The emails, which were exchanged over a period of several years between Iranian regime diplomats and analysts, show that Tabatabai was part of a regime propaganda unit set up in 2014 by the Iranian Foreign Ministry. The Iran Experts Initiative, IEI, tasked operatives drawn from Iranian diaspora communities to promote Iranian interests during the clerical regime's negotiations with the United States over its nuclear weapons program. Now, certainly Antony Blinken has read this by now, right? Blinken did this. Though several of the IEA operatives and others named in the emails have sought to portray themselves on social media as having engaged with the regime in their capacity as academic experts, or in order to promote better understanding between the U.S. and Iran, none has questioned the veracity of the emails, writes Lee Smith. And the contents of the emails are damning, showing a group of Iranian-American academics being recruited by the Iranian regime, meeting together in foreign countries to receive instructions from top regime officials, and pledging their personal loyalty to the regime, to the emails. They also show how the operatives use their Iranian heritage and Western academic positions to influence U.S. policy toward Iran, first as outside quote-unquote experts, and then from high-level U.S. government posts. Both inside and outside the government, the efforts of members of this circle were repeatedly supported in advance by Robert Malley, who served as the U.S. government's chief interlocutor with Iran under both the Obama and the Biden administrations. And again, he was appointed to this envoy position by Antony Blinken. Malley is also the former head of the International Crisis Group, ICG, which directly paid and credentialed several key members of the regime's influence operation. The IAEA, according to a 2014 email from one Iranian official to one of Iran's lead nuclear negotiators, quote, consisted of a core group of 6 to 10 distinguished second-generation Iranians who've established affiliation with the leading international think tanks and academic institutions, mainly in Europe and the United States. The network was funded and supported by an Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps official, Mustafa Zahrani, who was the point of contact between IAEA operatives and Iran's then Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif. I got your attention now, America? This is happening in the Biden administration. This is happening in the Blinken Department of State. It's not the first time in our history. According to the correspondence, the IEI recruited several U.S.-based analysts, including Tabatabai, Ali Vaez, and Dina Efskadiri, all of whom willingly accepted Iranian guidance. These Middle East experts were then subsequently hired, credentialed, supported, and funded by Robert Malley and the ICG, where he was president from January 2018 until January 2021, when he joined the Biden administration. Malley was also ICG's program director for Middle East and North Africa before the Obama administration tapped him in February 2014 to run negotiations for the Iran nuclear deal. All roads lead to Obama. Fundamental transformation of America, don't you know? Faiz joined the ICG in 2012 and served as Malley's top deputy. Emails quoted in the stories show that even once in government, Malley directed Faiz's actions at the ICG, sending him to Vienna where the Iranian and U.S. teams had nuclear negotiations. Quote, following the order of his previous boss, Malley, Ali Faiz will come to Vienna, Zarani reported, wrote Zarif in an April 3, 2014 email. Who from our group do you instruct to have a meeting with him? Faiz wrote Zarif directly after the Iranian foreign minister expressed dissatisfaction with the ICG report on Iran. Quote, as an Iranian based on my national and patriotic duty, wrote Faiz in an October 2014 email, I've not hesitated to help you in any way. From proposing to Your Excellency a public campaign against the notion of nuclear breakout to assisting your team in preparing reports on practical needs of Iran. These emails likely explain why Faiz was unable to obtain a security clearance by our government in order to join Malley in the Biden administration. At the same time, they raised the question of why Malley sought to bring Faiz into the State Department in the first place, and why he remained in close operational contact with him even after he was denied a security clearance. So this guy's dealing with the Iranian regime. After the Iran deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, Obama's sellout to Iran, after it was finalized in July 2015, the ICG hired another IEI operative as a consultant, Adnan Tabatabai, not to be confused with the Pentagon official, Iranian Tabatabai. Now, like Faiz, Adnan Tabatabai also pledged to dedicate his efforts to the Iranian regime. Sounds like Omar, who's pledged to represent Somalia in Congress, another terrorist regime. Stick with me. In an email from 2014, as the agreement was being negotiated, Adnan Tabatabai wrote to Zarif about the foreign minister's meeting in Vienna with IEI operatives, quote, as you will have noticed, we are all very much willing to dedicate our capabilities and resources to jointly working on the improvement of Iran's foreign relations. Iran is our country, so we too feel the need and responsibility to contribute our share. When I say we, I mean the very group you met. This is in our government and government-associated organizations. In early 2021, shortly before he joined the Biden administration, Robert Malley brought a third IEI operative, Dina Esfandiary, into the ICG. ICG did not respond by press time to Tablet's email requesting comment on its employee's role in an Iranian spy ring. February 2021, Malley hired Ariana Tabatabai to join his Iran team at the State Department. The emails document her cloying determination to prove her worth to the Iranian regime. Shortly after the 2014 meeting in Vienna, she sent Zarani a link to an article she'd co-authored with Esfandiary. Quote, as I mentioned last week, Dina and I wrote an article about the nuclear fuel of nuclear power plant at Bashir for the Bulletin, which was published today. Our goal was to show what is said in the West, that Iran does not need more than 1,500 centrifuges, is wrong, and that Iran should not be expected to reduce the number of its centrifuges. Zarani then forwarded the email to Zarif, the Iranian. You getting the drift here, Mr. Producer? All this back and forth with the Iranian regime in the State Department under Antony Blinken? In June 2014, Ariana Tabatabai emailed Zarani to say she'd been invited to conferences in Saudi Arabia and Israel and asked for his prior approval of her trips. I'd like to ask your opinion, too, to see if you think I should accept the invitation and go, she wrote. Zarani replied that Saudi Arabia is a good case, but the second case, Israel, is better to be avoided. She responded, "Thank you very much for your advice. I will take action regarding Saudi Arabia and keep you updated on the progress." There's no record of her traveling to Israel. A month later, she again wrote Zerani, asking for additional instruction. She'd been invited to join academic experts Gary Samori and William Toby to brief House members on the Foreign Relations, Armed Services, and Intelligence Committees. "I'm scheduled to go to Congress to give a talk about the nuclear program," she wrote. The IRGC, IRGC, that's the enemy. That's the Iranian military. "I will bother you in the coming days. I will be a little difficult since both Will and Gary do not have favorable views of Iran." Zerani forwarded the email to Zarif. Ariane Tabatabai's correspondence with Zerani offers clear evidence that Malley's protege was an active participant, writes Lee Smith, in a covert Iranian influence campaign designed to shape U.S. government policy in order to serve the interests of the Iranian regime. Her request for guidance from top Iranian officials, which she appears to have faithfully followed, and her desire to harmonize her own words and actions with regime objectives, are hardly the behavior of an impartial academic or a U.S. public servant, that is. Tabatabai's emails show her enthusiastically submitting to the control of top Iranian officials, who then guided her efforts to propagandize and collect intelligence on U.S. and allied officials in order to advance the interests of the Islamic Republic. Does Congress have no interest in this whatsoever? Has the Democrat Party? Seriously? Become the party of Iran? More when I return.
Mark Levin.
This is a 3-hour course. You need to listen to the second half of the program so you see where this ends. This isn't even about the Middle East. This is going on in the United States Department of State. An Iranian spy ring that goes to the highest levels. Robert Malley reports directly to Antony Blinken. He's not there anymore. You want to know why we haven't hit Iran proper yet for what it's done to our troops? You want to know why over $100 billion directly and indirectly flowed into Iran to rearm Iran? Do you want to know why the Biden administration, and especially the Secretary of State, keeps trashing Israel, trashing the Prime Minister of Israel? Why the vast majority of Democrats last night voted against a single bill to fund Israel? You want to know why? I'm telling you why. Right here. More when I return. I could spend the show talking about the reprobate Al Green being rolled out of the hospital to vote and so forth. How many times do you want to hear that? I'm talking about a dire and grave threat to the United States from within, empowering an enemy from without. Used to be that these were marquee headline stories. Now I'm the only one even talking about them and backing them up. So Lee Smith at the tablet goes on about the high-level Iranian spy ring busted in Washington right there in the Department of State, and part of it's in the Department of Defense. And you heard these various names. What you need to understand is you have people asking the regime, the foreign minister and his advisors over there in Iran, what words to use, who they should meet with. That we're with you, that we support you, that we represent you. Smith writes, it seems likely that by the time of her appointment to the Pentagon's Special Operations Office, Tabatabai's covert activities on behalf of the Iranian regime were well known in the Biden administration and intelligence circles, certainly by the Secretary of State, you would think. Quote, the hoops you have to jump through to get a bare-bones top-secret clearance, even without compartments of special access programs, are enormous, says Thoreau. They grill you on your foreign contacts with any foreign government, raise more red flags than Bernie Sanders' honeymoon, he says. Contacts with senior officials from enemy governments, classified as non-frat governments like Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran. are in a different category altogether. What would normally be totally disqualifying? So somebody had to intervene and wave her through. I'll find out in Discovery. I will find out if this traitor Blinken wants to challenge me in court. There's also the fact that as early as 2014, as Tablet has reported, the Obama administration was spying on Israeli officials and their contacts within the United States, including U.S. lawmakers and pro-Israel activists. You remember that? The fact that U.S. intel services routinely disobeyed guidelines preventing them from unmasking the identities of U.S. persons recorded in transcripts of foreign intelligence intercepts has been exhaustively demonstrated in a long series of U.S. government reports, congressional investigations, and other reporting. Since Zarif's communications, that's the foreign minister, and the IRGC's communications, that is the military wing of the Islamo-Nazi regime, were also collected, U.S. officials would have known about the IEI, and about the names of those working on behalf of Iran, such as Fayez and Tabatabai. Thoreau suggests that a range of U.S. authorities would have likely known about Malley's involved boyhood friend, would have been well aware of what they knew. Quote, when I was on the National Security Council, the National Security Agency would call to alert me when my name had popped up in a conversation among bad actors, Thoreau recalls. The facts of Robert Malley's involvement, our envoy to Iran, who worked directly for the Secretary of State Blinken, with the IEI and its agents, are likely to have been old news within the Biden administration. The impending publication of the IEI emails, remember this a little over a year ago, is likely the reason why Malley was put on leave in April and had his security clearances suspended. And as news of emails and their impending publication circulated in Washington, the administration moved him to the sidelines before Republican officials had the chance to demand his head on a spike. Why an Iranian operative is still at the Pentagon as I speak, especially in a job that gives her daily access to classified information that puts the country's most sensitive military operations at risk, is another matter entirely. Quote, the optimistic reading, says Thoreau, is that they were watching her to see what she does, and the FBI has her apartment all teched up. But to be an optimist, you have to believe the FBI is clean, rather than see this as a huge counterintelligence failure. Though, of course, it's not a failure if they were complicit, he says. Meanwhile, they're after Trump's documents, Mr. Producer. They've criminally charged Donald Trump and want to throw him in prison, former president, for documents. Nobody's been criminally charged here. The spy ring or conspiracy with Blinken, collusion, nobody. So far, however, the evidence points to a less optimistic reading, writes Smith. The Biden administration allowed Malley to push an Iranian agent into sensitive national security positions because she was the best equipped to carry out the administration's own policy. That is, to appease a terror regime with American blood on its hands. And it's doing it right now, damn it! Because the number of American officials who want to be responsible for protecting Iran's nuclear weapons program is limited. The White House went outside the federal bureaucracy for someone who is well connected to the regime and would relish the job of advancing the regime's interest, an Iranian spy. Congress needs to demand the Biden White House make Malley and Tabatabai available to testify immediately. It must also press to interview the security officials who buried evidence of her covert activities, putting her in a position to endanger the lives of American civilians and special forces operators. It's time to find out why the interests and now the personnel of the Iranian Death to America regime intersect so frequently with those of America's own ruling party. Hasn't been done yet. When Antony Blinken goes to the Middle East, he's a special pleader for Iran. He never mentions Iran. When our military hits Iranian surrogates, it gives them a heads up. It delays, We don't want a wider war with Iran. They say it over and over again. They don't hit main sites in Iran. I saw the great General Jack Kane on the Fox the other day. He was absolutely fantastic about, well, this is what we ought to do. You want to put an end to this, but they won't. And if it causes Americans to die, so be it. If Israelis are fodder for the terrorists, so be it. And you will notice when Blinken goes to the Middle East, he's there for one reason, not to organize a coalition to protect you and me, America, from an Iranian nuclear missile, but to try and destroy and usurp the one man who's standing between Iran and us, Benjamin Netanyahu. There's nobody else in the world. There's no president. There's no prime minister. There's no monarch. There's no dictator. It's him, and that's all there is. Nothing else. Which is why they hate him and hate Trump. We had a high-level Iranian spy ring in our country, in the Department of State, under our envoy to Iran, who was appointed by Blinken and rubber stamped by Biden. No accountability whatsoever. Virtually no media reporting whatsoever. And it gets worse. It gets worse. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
There is a report by a very reputable organization, not right-wing, not left-wing, Institute for Science and International Security. They want to think about that name. I guess it goes by ISIS, Mr. Producer, but nonetheless. The Iran threat Geiger counter reaching extreme danger. And we talked at length first hour, talked at length second hour. Now here's where the rubber hits the road. A national security threat is typically posed by a combination of hostile intentions and capabilities. The threat from Iran's nuclear program is no exception. This just came out. You haven't heard this on any news platform in America. Conservative, liberal, Democrat, none. Why? The Iran threat Geiger counter from the Institute for Science and International Security measures on a regular basis Iran's hostile actions and intentions toward the United States and U.S. allies and its capability to turn those hostile intentions into action, the potential or actual construction of nuclear weapons. As with the radiation levels measured by a Geiger counter, any level above zero represents a degree of danger. Since May 2023, the date of the last edition of the counter, the Geiger counter, the threat posed by Iran's nuclear program has increased dramatically. This increased threat has been in part fueled by the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel on October 7, Israel's subsequent invasion of Gaza, and subsequent attacks carried out by Iranian-backed proxy groups, including Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and Ansar Allah, that is, the Houthis. The volatile situation in the region is providing Iran with a unique opportunity and amplified internal justification for building nuclear weapons, while the United States and Israel's resources to detect and deter Iran from succeeding are stretched thin. Oh, but we have these 13, 14 members of the Freedom Caucus. Look, we can't vote for this unless there's an offset with the Internal Revenue. Good God. You guys have your heads up your asses. It's unbelievable. You see what's going on? The ongoing conflicts are leading to the neglect of the Iranian nuclear threat at a time when Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities have never been greater. Coupled with decreased transparency over its nuclear program, you know who's complaining about that? The UN, for God's sakes. We are facing the real possibility that Iran may choose to weaponize its nuclear capabilities and build nuclear weapons. There was an article the other day that said they can do it in a week. These grave and concerning changes have led the Institute to raise the total threat score to 151 out of 180. 151 out of 180, up from 140 in May 2023, and assessed as extreme danger. For the first time, the counter has ever reached this level. And there's our Secretary of State, the state of confusion, doing exactly what he intends to do. And let me tell you a little secret. You ready for this, America? Obama, Biden, Blinken, and Sullivan, they want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. First of all, if they didn't, they'd be acting completely differently, wouldn't they? So why do they want it to have a nuclear weapon? Because they want a realigned Middle East, as others have written, like Michael Dolan. And in order to do that, Israel must be weaker, and Israel's enemies must be stronger. And that's Iran. Now, this is insanity. This is suicide. And that's why I call Blinken a traitor. And that's why this spy ring was able to operate within the State Department under Blinken for as long as it did, and with Biden's blessing. No questions from any of the media to the dim-witted press secretary ever about the spy ring, ever about Iran and the nukes. You hear nothing. And what about this Geiger counter from this highly regarded think tank? Not a word. This just came out. The current score of 151 is the extreme danger territory. Most of the points are the result of Iran's hostile actions and rhetoric against the United States and its allies, combined with the fact that Iran's nuclear breakout time remains at 0. In other words, now. The rest result from Iranian progress on developing sensitive nuclear capabilities, increasing its nuclear weaponization efforts beyond breakout, and inadequate transparency over its nuclear program. They've thrown out the UN now. The scores have increased across the board since May 2023, moving the overall threat score to extreme danger. That's okay. We got to get Trump, It's Trump. Got to get Trump. Jake Tapper is very busy representing Hamas. Got to get Trump. And it goes through in detail. Have I posted this yet, Mr. Producer? I didn't hear you. Have I posted this yet? All right, so our Geiger counter, this scholarly report is on my platforms. And I would encourage you, if you can't read it all, at least read the summary and pass it around. Because this nation is facing a dire threat from Iran and from within. From a traitor, who's the Secretary of State, from a spy ring worse than Al Jarhis ever did within the Department of State and in the Biden administration, and an effort to really weaken, if not destroy, the state of Israel. Because that's what Iran wants. And then a nuclear weapon which tops it off. And once they get a nuke, there's no turning back. Can you imagine? This is why they have not hit Iran yet, because they are special pleaders for Iran. Every one of those people in that spy ring should have been arrested by now. I don't know that any has been. Any.